Hello, welcome to this week's lesson. I'm Brian Vermeer, and last week, we talked a little bit about what happens when we make plans, but then God changes those plans. Today, we're going to be looking at following God's plans, and we're going to still be in the book of Numbers, finishing up the book of Numbers actually today. Next week, we'll start in with the book of Deuteronomy, and today we'll be in Numbers chapters 33 and 34, and we're going to be hearing Moses giving some final instructions to the Israelites about going in and taking the promised land. Before we begin, though, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoy these videos, please like, share, subscribe, and if you can, please support me on Patreon. You will see the address at the end of the video. All right, so Moses is giving instructions to the Israelites. They have reached the promised land. All they have to do now is cross the Jordan River and go in and take the land. But it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be just go in and take it. They're going to have to work to get it. And that's one of the things that Moses is talking to them about. They've spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Everyone who left Egypt that was over the age of 20 has died off, except for Moses himself, Joshua, and Caleb. Even Moses' brother Aaron and sister Miriam have died off. And Moses himself knows that he's not going to enter the promised land, and that's why he's given these instructions to the Israelites. So what is he telling them? Let's take a look at Numbers chapter 33, verses 50 to 53. It says, "The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. Tell the Israelites, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all of the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy all their stone images and cast images, and demolish all their high places. You are to take possession of the land and settle in it, because I have given you the land to possess." So the Israelites are in the plains of Moab. Last week we mentioned Moab a little bit. We said that King Balak of Moab was worried about the Israelites, so he hired Balaam to come and place a curse on the Israelites, but instead Balaam actually ended up blessing the Israelites. Well, the Israelites have now gone through Moab, and they're kind of on the edge of the land of Moab, and they're able to look over across the river and see the land that they're going to be given. So God tells Moses, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, there's some instructions that you have to follow here. He says, first of all, you need to drive out all of the inhabitants. In other words, this land is already occupied. So you're going to have to take the inhabitants that are there and drive them out. Not share the land with them, but drive them out. Now, why is God telling the Israelites to do this? Some people think that this is cruel. They have a problem with God telling them. For example, when they go in to take the first city, the city of Jericho, Joshua gives them the instructions to go in and kill everybody in the city, men, women, and children. And some people have a problem with that. Why would God want them to kill every single person? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The main reason for it is God is using the Israelites as judgment against these other nations. These are nations that are pagan. These are nations that worship false gods. It says they worship gods of stone and cast gods. Cast gods would be probably idols made out of iron or other metal that are formed in a mold. And now think about it. Is it really a god if you have to make a mold to form it? Is something like that? Is when you worship an idol, it's not, you're not saying people are made in God's image. You're saying your God is made in your image because you're the one who designed what the idol looks like. But God is using the Israelites as judgment against these nations because they have been disobeying him. Remember, a lot of these nations are related to the Israelites, maybe a little distantly, but most of them are related somehow. So at one time or another, they all had a knowledge of God, but their civilization has turned completely away from God. So God is going to destroy each of these nations. At least that's what his plan is. And the Israelites are part of his plan to destroy all of these nations. He's going to use the Israelites to wipe out these other nations. that have turned against him. So that's why he tells the Israelites to do that. Another reason is so that the Israelites will not be tempted by these other peoples. They will not fall into the habits of these other people and begin to worship their gods and begin to follow their rituals. You know, when you move into a new land, me moving into a new town. About 30 years ago, I moved into the town that I'm living in now. And when I did, I had to learn how things are done here. I had to learn what kind of, what kind of festivals do they celebrate. My wife is going to be selling crafts at a town festival, this coming weekend. So I had to learn, when that was going to be, because we don't have that particular festival at the town that I came from. So that's just, one little example, and that's not a religious thing necessarily. But, it's each town is different. Each place is different, Going from the south to the north, or, other way around, you find that people do things differently, say things differently, call things by different names. And you have to learn what those are. And the cultures are different. It's the point I guess I'm trying to get here, in different places. And God is afraid of the Israelites falling into the cultures of these other nations to the point that they begin worshiping these people's gods and following their religious practices. God doesn't want the Israelites to do that. So he's telling them, go in and destroy all these people so that you won't fall into their bad habits. You won't be tempted by them to do the things that they do, because God says, I want you to do the things the way I want you to do them. You need to be your own nation. Remember, the whole Old Testament is God setting up the nation of Israel to be the nation from which the Messiah comes. The Israelites were supposed to live differently than everybody else. Just as we as Christians today are to live differently than everybody else. Because we are to show the Messiah to the rest of the world. They should be able to look at us and tell that we are different. And it was the same way with the Israelites. The other nations were supposed to look at them and know that they are different. And the other nations were supposed to strive to be like them. And God knew these other nations wouldn't take that attitude. That instead they would try to tempt the Israelites to join them, just as the world tries to get us as Christians to follow them, to do things their way instead of God's way. So that's why God is telling the Israelites to go in and completely drive out all of these people. He says, destroy all of their stone images and their cast images, all of their false gods, destroy them. Don't even just leave them as reminders, because you're going to end up worshiping them just like they do. And then he says, demolish all of their high places. The high places are simply the places of worship, where the idols were set up, where they would do their rituals. He says, destroy all of those. Tear down all of their temples, these buildings they've built, or any structures they have that they use to worship their false gods. Destroy them. Take possession of the land and settle it, because I have given you this land to possess. Notice, God says, I'm giving you this land. You're going in and taking it, but don't get the idea that you are taking this land. God is taking the land. It's God's plan. We're just the instrument through which God performs his plan. We don't include God in our plans. We should be included in God's plan. Well, the Israelites do go in, and of course we find out, if you read the rest of the Old Testament, that they didn't do this. They didn't go in and completely drive out all these people. Instead, they went in and lived among them. And this does end up causing problems for the Israelites later on. So let's continue on now and look at Numbers chapter 33, verses 54 to 56, continuing on with what Moses was telling the Israelites. You are to receive the land as an inheritance by lot according to your clans. Increase the inheritance to a large clan, and decrease it for a small one. Whatever place the lot indicates for someone will be his. You will receive an inheritance according to your ancestral tribes. But if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, those you allow to remain will become barbs for your eyes and thorns for your sides. They will harass you in the land where you live, and what I had planned to do to them, I will do to you. So he says, first of all, you're going to receive this inheritance by lot. When they go in and they take all this land, and you can read about this in the book of Joshua, they were to divide the land among the 12 tribes. And each tribe would then divide their section of the land according to the clans in their tribe, according to each family group within their tribe. And he says, make sure you do it fairly, not necessarily evenly. In other words, if this clan is a lot bigger than this one, then give, this clan more land because they need it. So what he's saying is, first of all, do it by lot, make it kind of a random draw as to who gets what part, but also make sure that it's divided up fairly according to how big these clans are. But then he gives them a warning. He says, if you don't drive out these inhabitants, then those that you allow to remain are going to be barbs for your eyes and thorns for your sides. So think of sticking, a barb on a fishhook in your eye. That's what he's saying these people are going to be like. They're going to tempt you. They're going to seduce you. They're going to get you to try to follow them. They're going to try to get you to do things their way. They're going to say, we were here first, so you need to do things the way that we do them. God says, no, this is your land. So you go in, you take it, and you do things your way, which should be my way. When we leave our homes and set up our own houses, we need to remember, when we leave our father and mother and go off to set up our own house, we need to remember to do things God's way. We need to remember to still follow God's plan, to do things the way that God wants them to do. Just because we are now free, the Israelites were now free from the Egyptians, but just because we're free doesn't mean we're free from God. We need to still follow the Lord, because the Lord's way is best. God knows what is right. God knows what we need. So that's why we simply need to follow his instruction. And God tells the Israelites here, these people are going to be thorns in your sides. In other words, they're going to continually cause problems for you. They're going to be a pain that you can't get rid of. If you don't do it now, if you don't go in and drive them out now, it's going to be harder to do it later. The longer we put off trying to follow God, the harder it is to try to get back to him. They say the majority of Christians who leave the church do so in the first couple of years after they graduate from high school. Usually because it's during that time that they move out, they're on their own for the first time. There's no one to make them go to church anymore. And they just get away. They decide, I'm just not going to go for a little while. And then the longer they stay out, the harder it is for them to go back. And the easier it is for them just to pick up the ways of the world, the ways of their friends. They make new friends, and they start doing things the way their friends want to do it. Never get away from God. And if you already have gotten away from God, it's not too late to turn back. You need to get the courage up to go back to him. God will always take you back. There's nothing you've done that is so bad that God won't forgive you and God won't take you back. God says, if you don't drive these people out, what I planned to do to them, I will do to you. What did God plan to do to them? He planned to judge them and to drive them out of the land. God says, if you don't drive them out of the land, I'm going to drive you out of the land. God is giving them this land. God can take that land away from them. And he does that. We know again from history. The Israelites turned away from God. And eventually the Assyrian army came in and drove the nation of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, out of the land of Israel. And then the Babylonian army came in and drove the tribes of Judah and Benjamin out of their land. And it took them 70 years before they were allowed to go back. And then Jesus came, and they didn't accept the Messiah. And the Romans came in AD 70 and drove them out again. And it took them until the year 1948 to come back, before God let them come back and establish their kingdom again, or establish their government again. So God says, look, I'm giving you blessings. But just as easily as God gives us blessings, he can take those blessings away if we don't follow him. God says, what I plan to do to your enemies, I'm going to end up doing to you if you don't follow my instructions. Let's finish up now and look at chapter 34 of Numbers, verses 13 to 15. So Moses commanded the Israelites, this is the land you are to receive by lot as an inheritance, which the Lord commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes. For the tribe of Reuben's descendants and the tribe of Gad's descendants have received their inheritance according to their ancestral families. And half the tribe of Manasseh has received its inheritance. The 2.5 tribes have received their inheritance across the Jordan east of Jericho toward the sunrise. As the Israelites were approaching the land of Canaan, as they were approaching the promised land, coming through the land of Moab and so on, before they crossed the river, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh saw the land that they were traveling through. And they said, hey, this is actually pretty good land here. Why don't we just live here instead? Instead of going across the river into the land of Canaan, let's just take this land and let's just live here. So Moses went to God and asked on their behalf. And God said, okay, they can do that as long as the men of those tribes still go across the river with the rest of Israel and help conquer the rest of that land. And then when that land has been conquered and that land has been divided among the other 9.5 tribes, then they can come back and settle the land east of the Jordan River where they want to be. So that's why Moses is saying here, the land over there being given to the 9.5 tribes. Because 2.5 tribes have already decided they don't even want to go across the river into the promised land. They want to settle where they are. Now, was it wrong for them to ask that? No, it wasn't. As long as they asked God for permission to do that, and then God gave them permission to do that. So they asked Moses, and Moses asked God, and God said, okay, they can do that. However, they still need to help their other tribes to conquer their land as well. Sometimes God does give us our blessings in advance, but he still expects us to follow his instructions afterwards. You might think that, okay, I followed God and now God has given me all this, so now I can sit back and relax and enjoy myself, and I don't need to follow God anymore. No, that's not the way it works, because again, God is the one who gives you the blessings. God can take them away as well. And God is telling these 2.5 tribes, yes, you can go ahead and have this land. You can go ahead and settle this land now. But you're still going to help your brothers. You're still going to help the other tribes. So God still expects us to follow his instructions, even if he has already blessed us. In fact, that should make us want to follow his instructions more, because that should make us thankful to God. Since he has already blessed us, we should be thankful for the blessings that he has given us, and that should make us want to follow him even more. So the Israelites here are all set to cross over the river and take the promised land. God has given them the instructions, go in, drive out all of these people. We need to remember to listen to the instructions that God gives us, to follow them exactly the way he says to, even if we don't always understand why, even if we don't know what the final outcome will be or can't see the reasoning behind it. God has a reason. God wanted these other nations destroyed. He didn't necessarily tell the Israelites why he wanted them destroyed, but they were to go in and destroy them anyway. When God tells you to do something, you do it, even if you don't understand why he wants you to do it. He has his reasons. And don't think that once God has given you the reward for what you've done, that means you can stop following him. As long as you're alive, God has something he wants you to do. And you need to continue to follow him all of your life. So that's as far as we're going in the book of Numbers. The book of Deuteronomy is next. We'll talk about it for the next few weeks. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell address. He knows he's not going to go into the promised land, so he's going to give his final charge to the people of Israel before they go in and conquer the promised land. So, stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next week.